What's up, everyone? My name is Z, and I'm the Associate Director at Day One. You have tuned in to Restorative Practices Teachers Edition. Before we get started, just to give some background about who Day One is, we are working to end teen dating abuse and domestic violence through community education, supportive services, legal advocacy, and leadership development. We work with young people under the age of 24, as well as survivors, to teach them and help them have safe, healthy, and respectful partnerships. Some of the services that Day One offers are community education, which is what you have here. We have a legal team, a social services team, RAP coordinators, and ERAP coordinators who work within schools with young people to offer specialized supports. If you need or want any further information, my contact information will be at the end. Please feel free to use this. So before we get started, just want to go over some community agreements. Make sure you're kind to yourself. If you need to get up and stretch, please do that. Make sure you use the bathroom and get water. Pause when you need to. Listen with love. We know that everything that you do is for your young people. You know your young people and your students better than anyone else. So take what you need and leave what you don't need. Speak from the eye. Make sure that you are sharing things that is based on your perspective and how you see things. Make sure that the stories stay and the lessons leave. As always, we encourage you to share your feelings and your thoughts. You can drop them in the comments or you can just take notes. And last but not least, I promise we're going to have a good time. You ready? So, just to let you know what our day is going to look like just a little bit, we are going to be here for about an hour. We're going to talk about restorative practices, what they are and what they are not. We're going to talk a little bit about the person and environment perspective. We're going to talk about the correlation between restorative practices and social emotional learning. We're going to talk about how restorative practices can help improve classroom management. And then I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for implementation of restorative language and concepts. So I'm going to read this quote. And as I read it, I want you to think about what comes up for you as I read through it. Conflict is not a problem that needs solving, but a phenomenon that needs understanding. And this is by Dominic Barter. So when I think about this, I think about how often our young people are prejudged based off of the decisions that they make. And we all know that young people make mistakes, adults make mistakes. So for me, what's coming up is pretty much just thinking about like how can we be better at understanding the mistakes that our young people make so that we can do a better job of helping to cultivate them and teach them the skills that they need to be successful. It's undeniable that teachers have the hardest jobs in the world. Y'all are the ones on the day to day, while some students love you and love coming to school, and others are disengaged and just disrespectful toward their staff and toward their peers. Restorative practices are a way to help hold each other accountable, to teach communication skills, to talk about needs and feelings, and to support students while also de escalating harmful behaviors. And the best part about restorative practices is that you don't need any new worksheets. You don't have to read any new books. Everything that we're about to talk to today, you already know. You've been doing it day in and day out. All it takes is to reach inside of you and pull out the knowledge that you already have. So let's take a moment to reflect. I want you to think back to when you were a young person. And this could be elementary, middle school, or high school. What did it feel like to be a kid? What did it feel like when adults talked at you and not to you? Now we're going to fast forward just a little bit. What does it feel like now when someone talks at you and not to you? How does it feel when someone you work with invalidates your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas, or your experiences? If you're thinking about it, I can assume that the consensus is that we don't like being undermined or invalidated. So, on the next slide, we're going to watch a small video as an introduction to restorative practices. And after that video, we're going to discuss some of our noticings and our wonderings.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe, diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How we relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. To learn more, attend our flagship event, Basic Restorative Practices. Enroll in a graduate course.
So, as you reflect on the video, what are some thoughts that came to mind? Where might you have seen restorative practices before? Is there anything in the video that you already do with your students? Are there things you would like to explore? If you answered yes to any of these questions, or even if you answered no, the idea is that you're opening your mind to something broader and something that's worth exploring. Like I said before, this is not anything new. It is not a new implementation. It's not a new thing that you have to do. It's something that's going to make you think a little bit, but the end result is best for everyone. So you're in the right spot because we're about to learn so much about restorative practices.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace.
All right. So let's take a moment and we're going to look at the tale of two schools. On the left side of your screen, what you see is something called a zero tolerance education system. And on the right side of your screen, what you see is a restorative based education system. Now, let me start by saying that there are places within the United States that are already working in a restorative way. Chicago is one of those places. San Diego has started to implement restorative practices, and there are a ton of other places throughout the map. New York, however, is still working under a semi zero tolerance education system. So let's go through this a little bit just to explain the differences and what it looks like. Carlos is our young person that you see right here on your screen at the top. And he had a heated argument with his parents before leaving for school this morning. So he's already running late. So let's look at the differences between what happens when Carlos enters school under zero tolerance versus when he enters school under restorative practices. Let's start with zero tolerance. So he comes into the school. Remember, he's running late. If you've ever been late, you already are frustrated. He's greeted by metal detectors and a police search, right? And not all schools have metal detectors, but when you're running late, you may not be greeted with a friendly face, right? So he's at the school now and he's running late to first period class, right? And when he gets to the class and he tries to settle in, his teacher scolds him in front of the class. Carlos is already frustrated. Let's keep that in mind. So what does he do? He talks back and he's given detention. The day goes on and probably still feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, not having a moment to talk about how he feels. He gets into an altercation with another kid in the cafeteria. The police officer detains him and arrests both students. Later on in the afternoon, Carlos is held in a juvenile detention facility all afternoon, missing school. He now has an arrest record and is facing a superintendent suspension. Okay. So we know that sometimes these things happen, right? Especially in high schools, but it's not uncommon to see them in middle schools or in elementary schools. So let's see what would have happened or could have potentially happened if Carlos would have entered school with a restorative based system. Same situation, he's running late and he gets to the building and the teachers and administrators welcome him. They say hello, they greet him. They don't highlight the fact that he is late. He gets to his first period class and he's able to sit down and pick up and start learning from wherever the teacher left off. At the end of the class, the teacher pulls him to the side to ask him what's going on, and then that teacher sets them up with his school counselor so that they can talk more about what happened and what kind of supports he may need. When he gets to the cafeteria, he still gets into a fight because we know sometimes things just linger, right? But instead of getting arrested, student peer mediators and support staff intervene, right? And this could be deans, it could be teachers, it could be the cafeteria people, literally anyone. They have the students sit together to de-escalate the situation. This is also known as a mediation. We're going to talk a lot about mediations in a few, but just to give you an idea. Lastly, instead of being held in the juvenile detention facility, right, Carlos and the other student agreed to help clean up the cafeteria during a free period. Carlos meets with his counselor and parents after school to help resolve the conflict at home. So, what are we noticing here? We're seeing one kid and two different scenarios. On the left hand side, he may go down a road that may not be what he wanted to just for having a bad day. On the right side, you see that Carlos is given the supports that he needs and that his family needs to make better decisions. Based on these two different situations, you can kind of guess that restorative practices is better than zero tolerance because you're given supports where supports are due. When you choose to implement restorative practices into your classroom, we are changing the narrative for students of color. Although it isn't a new thing to learn, it does take a little effort to think about your choices or words before you say them. Think of it this way. When you were a young person, didn't you want to be heard? Didn't you wish that someone would give you a chance to explain your side of the story so that you could learn and grow? Will it be uncomfortable? Yeah, a little bit. Will it change our thinking and better our communication? Absolutely. Moving right along. So let's take a moment to bridge the gap. In the social work world, many of us use CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy to help our clients connect their thoughts to their feelings and their feelings to their behaviors. Often, we ask our clients to reflect on their experiences, expectations, or choices. We try not to shame our clients, but really to get them to connect how their harmful behaviors have affected them and those around them. Doesn't that sound familiar? I thought so. When you think back to elementary school, often our teachers try to teach us how to manage our emotions. They try to teach us and help us learn how not to hit or how to use our words when we're upset or angry. They ask us questions like, how did that make you feel? What could you have done differently to change the outcome? And both of these examples are examples of restorative practices and restorative language. I told you it's not something that you knew. I told you everything that you're learning here, you already know. As we grow through different stages of development, we notice that some teachers continue to ask those questions while others become more punitive rather than restorative. And this is not to point the finger to say that some teachers are bad or some teachers are not. It's just to show that this could happen for many reasons. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how and what some of those reasons are and how they come to be. So, looking at this model, this is called the person and environment model. I'm going to give you a moment to just glance over it and to look at some notices and wonderings that you see. In this model that you see before you, individuals, which is the very first box, intrapersonal, is influenced by different factors in our environment. Looking at the first circle, it speaks directly to the individual. For this definition, you can feel free to take the place of a student or to remain the teacher. Think about characteristics that make up who you are or who you were as a young person. Attributes like your gender, your religious identity, your racial and ethnic identity, your sexual orientation, economic status, resources that you may know and be privy to, values, your goals, your expectations, your age, your genetics, resiliency factors that you may have built up, coping skills, time management skills, all of these things are forms that come from the individual perspective. You may think about yourself and how you see yourself in the larger picture of the world and the systems that's attached to it. But we all know as humans that we didn't just conjure up who we are, right? We didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm this person because that's just who I am, right? We know that as teachers and as adults, we have been influenced by things around us, right? We have been influenced by our primary groups, which is our family, our friends, right? Our work group, if you have a roommate, supervisors, advisors, right? Things that come from your primary groups in your family could include rituals, right? Your religious beliefs could potentially come from your family, customs, traditions that you may have, right? If you're on a sports team, that is considered part of your primary group. And when we're thinking about young people and young people specifically, right, we know that young people spend most of their time with their friends, right? Whether that is in school or after school, right? They're also super influenced by their teachers and school staff because for most young people, they spend most of their time in school with the school staff, with the teachers, with their friends. So it is safe to say that friends at a certain point in their lives have more effect, teachers have more effect than even their families to some extent. Then in that third circle, we look at institutional factors, right? And the institutional factor is very simply the school that you're in, right? Thinking about your school, right? Thinking about what characteristics make up your school, the climate, right? Tolerance versus intolerance, right? Flexibility in class scheduling, right? Is the building clean? Is it safe? Right? Do young people like going there because they feel like they are loved and they are wanted, right? What is the energy? What is the vibe, right? That's what we think about when we think about person and environment. All of these things, including community and public policy, affect who we are as individuals. And so when we took the stance of being either a young person or the teacher that you are now, I want you to simply think about the fact that everything affects who I am as a young person, and I'm just trying to figure it out, right? I'm trying to make it make sense. I'm trying to figure out if what my friends are telling me is goes against what my parents are telling me, if what my teachers are telling me goes against what my friends are telling me, right? And I am one person trying to make it all make sense. If you have more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat after. So remember, again, I told you, you're not learning anything new here. And if you're a teacher at NYC, you have definitely seen this wheel before without a doubt. It's the same as the previous circle, but the only difference is that it surrounds what the schools look like on a day to day, right? Thinking about social emotional learning with the young person in the middle and all the other things surrounding them on how we support, right? So in a restorative world, right? In interpersonal environment world, right? We are giving our young people all the tools that they need to be successful within classrooms, within schools. We're supporting families through authentic partnerships and then communities, right? So restorative practices don't just happen within a school building. They should be happening within the family setting. They should be happening in community centers. They should be happening everywhere that our young people frequent, right? So that it changes the narrative from punitive to restorative, and it changes the narrative that young people go through when they make mistakes to forgiveness. And forgiveness is super important. So now that we understand the connection between students and teacher behavior, we're going to shift gears just a little bit to talk about how social emotional learning and restorative practices are interconnected. But first, we're going to take a moment for me to take a breath. All right. So looking at this model, and you may not be able to see it too well, but if you can, this just allows you to understand that there's a severe overlap between social emotional learning and restorative practices. More often than not, people think that they have to do one or the other and that they're not interchangeable. But the reality is you can't really have restorative practices if you don't have good social emotional skills. Um, so going back and thinking about how, especially since COVID-19 and since the pandemic, social emotional learning has become the buzzword. It has been the highest used word that has been around since 2021, since our kids came back, right? We have been hearing it, and teachers have been asked to implement social emotional learning into everything that they do, right? To really reach from within and think about the whole child, right? Sometimes it can be overwhelming when there are 100,000 other things, but restorative practices is a way to kind of bridge that gap by just using our language, right? And figuring out how our language supports who we are. Restorative justice is a theory of justice, right? That focuses on mediation and agreement rather than punishment. It's that simple. And teachers, I know y'all have been asked to think about all the things. Y'all have been given initiatives from PBIS to bullying campaigns, and some of you have even been tasked with restorative circles, right? And you're probably just like, I don't know if I want to do another thing. But what I want you to remember and what is most important about implementation of restorative language is that it starts with just using your words. That's it. Just taking that extra step to say, you know what? Let me ask this young person what's going on so that I can help them get to the root of whatever their problem is. It takes a village. It takes a village to be a teacher. It takes a village to be a parent. And you all are doing amazing work every single day. By implementing restorative practices, your work only gets easier and only gets stronger. Restorative practices is really about building relationships with your young people, right? Helping them build respect and welcoming environments, right? Looking at the whole school and saying, how can we be supportive all around, no matter where our young people go, how can we support them? That's really what restorative practices tied into SEL is all about. So now we're going to take a brain break. Please feel free to pause your video here and take as long as you need. And when you are ready, you can unpause and we will continue on our merry way. All right, y'all. Welcome back. I hope y'all had a great break. I know I did. So let's get into the second part of this webinar. Um, I'm going to read this quote, and I just want you to, just think about what our kids need. How do we get disinterested students to care about themselves and their education? Christopher Edem. We must start to change the way we see our students. We must change the way we start to approach our students. We must change the way we approach education. That is the only way we are going to get disengaged young people to engage. That is the only way we are going to change the narrative that has been. So now we're going to watch a small video and then we're going to get into talking about some of the things that will be helpful and useful when trying to implement restorative language and restorative practices into your classrooms.
Restorative practices teaches kids how to resolve conflict peacefully. Restorative practices promote empathy, responsibility, and respect. These practices focus on repairing harm, building relationships, and giving everyone a voice. Restorative conversations are a transformative way for everyone, especially young people, to navigate difficult conversations. These conversations are really helpful when managing conflict with peers. Here are 6 steps you can take to start having restorative conversations with your peers. Step number 1, prepare yourself. Before you can resolve conflict, set an intention to connect before you correct. In other words, you must have an understanding mindset that is ready to listen and work towards finding a peaceful resolution. You can do this by focusing on your breathing. Breathe in deeply for 3 seconds, and then exhale deep and slow for 6 seconds. Be sure to use I statements. For example, I felt pain, or I felt upset, or I felt hurt. You can also use I noticed that as a way to start a sentence. Remember, go low and slow. Take your time. Don't rush the restorative process. Acknowledge your feelings no matter how deep or hard. Ensure everyone has a voice and has a chance to answer each of the restorative questions. Remember, it's okay to take a break at any time during the process. Step number 2, acknowledge your own personal needs, emotions, and thoughts. Step number 3, use restorative questions. It's important that you're able to take the perspective of others. Each person should explain the situation from their perspective. Try to see the situation from the point of view of the other person. Remember, people may often feel very differently about the same situation. Ask questions such as, what happened? What's been going on for you? What were you feeling? Step number 4, how can we repair the harm that has been done? You must work together to decide how to make things better or solve the problem. Step number 5, come up with a shared agreement. This can be a verbal agreement, a checklist, or even a written contract. And then step number 6, check in and check out. Address any concerns that might come up in the future. Remember, conflict is inevitable. It's gonna happen, but it can be transformed through restorative conversations. Perhaps the most important thing to remember about having restorative conversations is to show compassion, to be authentic, and practice empathy. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
All right. So as we reflect on that video, I want us to take a moment just to think about compassion and empathy. Think about a time someone gave you compassion and empathy when you didn't necessarily know you needed it. Think about a time that you may have given compassion or empathy to someone just because, right? Just because it was the right thing to do. That's all you need to think about when you're implementing restorative languages, when you're trying to have restorative conversations. Just come from a place of empathy. right? This might mean stepping back and taking those deep breaths, like was said in the video, right? Before approaching the student or approaching a hostile situation. Just think about grounding yourself. So, going on to think about how questioning can be effective, right? We want to make sure that we ask certain questions that elicit the answers that we want, but also get our young people to think, right? Restorative practices really involve getting to the root cause of what is happening, right? And the questions can be asked to the person who caused harm as well as the person who had the harm done to them, okay? So, in the questions that you see on the screen, they are for both, right? To respond into the challenging behavior and to help the one harmed by the other's actions, right? So questions like what happened, right? What were you thinking of at the time, right? To get them to reflect. What have you thought about since? So most kids are gonna say, Miss, I'm not thinking about that. It is what it is, right? But it's really for them to kind of dial down and think like, you really didn't think about anything since it happened, nothing, right? Who has been affected by what you've done and in what way? Really getting them to think about who did you hurt and how did they get hurt, right? Because sometimes I may have had a fight with one person, but it may have disrupted the class, right? It may have disrupted the whole day, right? And now everything is kind of chaotic and all over the place, right? I may have gotten hurt as a teacher. And what do you think you need to make this right? It's really important to elicit consequential thinking in our young people, right? For them to really think about the choices that they make and the outcomes, right? So, giving them the opportunity to say the ball is in your court, right? You're telling me that you understand that you caused the harm and you made a mistake. How can I support you in figuring out what the next thing is that you need to help make it right with that person, with those people, with me, whatever that looks like? I also want to say that although these conversations are talking about restorative communication and language from teacher to student, this also is very important because this language can be used from teacher to teacher or student to teacher when teachers cause harm as well, right? Because sometimes it's just a busy day and we tend to react and not respond because there's a lot going on, right? This is about creating accountability on both sides, right? Understanding that as adults, we make mistakes too. And we want to make sure that we empower our young people to know that even as adults, we can say we're sorry. The second part of the questioning is really about helping the person who got harmed to find out what do they need, right? So questions like, what did you think when you realized what had happened, right? So you had a fight, whatever happened, what did you realize, right? Once that thing went down, what impact has this incident had on you and others, right? So how did it impact you, right? Did you miss a day of school, right? Did you get in trouble at home? What happened, right? What has been the hardest thing for you? So now that this thing is over, what's been the hardest thing to deal with, right? Is it the cuts and bruises? Is it the fact that you feel like you lost a friend? What is it, right? And then finally, what do you think needs to be done to make things right? Same question as before, but it's super important to understand that just like in the video, there's three different sides to every story, right? And two people can experience something that we think is the same thing, but we know for a fact completely different, right? So this is really about both young people getting the opportunity to say their piece, to talk about their truth, and also to help to de escalate the situation in a way that doesn't transcend into something bigger, right? Students getting suspended, right? Students, I don't know, being arrested, right? Really to try to create spaces to get them to communicate. Because the thing about restorative language is that we try to build community and build relationships, right? And if we continue to exile our young people when they make a mistake, it says that the community and the school is not a place for learning, right? It says that it's a place for anything but learning, essentially, right? And we all know that the reality is that the school building is the one place where you should be able to make a mistake and learn from your mistake because everyone there are teachers and learners. So let's play a little game, okay? This game is Would You Rather. So you can feel free to pause, or you can kind of just go straight through it and read with me. You're going to read the scenario and you're going to determine which one you would rather hear as a young person. Okay? Channel your inner little kid. So let's think back to elementary and late middle school, right? Let's channel our inner young person, all right? So let's do the first one. Don't lean back on your chair. I've already told you about that this morning. Now, we all have been there, we all have done it, we've all said it, right? How does that sound when I say it to you? How about this one? I know it's been a long day, but we're almost at the end. Let's try to sit up for the last stretch. Which one sounds like I would prefer to hear that one if I was a young person? If you're saying the white, I agree too. I would rather hear it that way as well. So now you're going to go through these, and and this is really for you to start to think about some of the common phrases that we say on a day to day, right? That we don't necessarily realize are punitive, but we do them because we're so used to them, because it's a norm. So take a moment, go through this at your leisure, and start to implement those restorative languages, those restorative words into your vocabulary. You can also feel free to take a screenshot. All right. So we talked a lot about what restorative practices are. Let's talk a little bit about what they are not, because more often than not, I hear people all the time tell me, "Oh, this is gentle. It doesn't teach consequences." But let's clarify some things, okay? So restorative practices are not only a response to conflict. That is number one, right? Restorative practices are a way to praise young people when they're doing a great job, right? And to give them those kudos, right? To be like, good job, so proud of you, right? It's not only just when things are bad, right? It teaches accountability and empathy and love, but those things can also happen in positive ways as well. It's not being soft when students are eliminating consequences, right? In a lot of schools, people who are implementing restorative practices, whether it's deans or teachers, anyone in the building, right? We know that we are also up against what the school's regulations are, right? So it doesn't eliminate the consequence, but it gives the opportunity to have consequential thinking to think about the actions and the decisions that you make as a young person, and to say, what can I do to repair and rebuild my community, right? So it may be changing the consequence a little bit, making it look a little different than what we're so used to, but the outcome and the reward will be so much more. It isn't just classroom management, right? So it can play and help support classroom management. It definitely can be used as a de-escalation tool without a doubt, but it isn't classroom management, right? It isn't I'm just gonna be restorative and like all the kids are gonna listen and fall in line and do all the things that we want them to do, right? No, we know that kids are still going to be kids, right? We know that they're going to have to sit in certain ways. And as a teacher, you're going to have to continue to move them around and make it make sense for you, right? And like I said in the beginning, you know your kids better than anyone else, right? So it's not classroom management, but it is a tool that can be used to support classroom management and build those relationships. Restorative practices are not punitive. And I know most people go, well, duh, right? But the reality is that often we try to use restorative practices as a tool to also be punitive, and that's not how it works. If we're saying that we are creating an environment that speaks to young people's growth, we are not saying, oh, we're going to suspend them, right? Just because they didn't do the thing the way that we intended them to do it, right? We're giving them opportunities, we're giving them choices, we're giving them a way to make a mistake, to grow through it. But at the end of the day, it's not punitive, right? And we are, again, working with a school system. And it is very important that young people understand that families understand that, and that we are doing our best that we can to support them. Restorative practices are not an intervention. It's not a program, a set of prompts, or a band aid. More often than not, I've had people come to me and say, it's not working. And you've implemented it for a week or 2 weeks, right? I always tell people, think of it like this. If I'm 12 years old, I have 12 years of conditioning, 12 years of being the way I am, 12 years of learning certain behaviors, 12 years of growing, hanging out with my friends, hanging out with my family, right? I have 12 years of this. So it's not going to take me a week or 2 weeks to unlearn the things that I've learned, right? It's not something that is going to be implemented like a program. It is a way that we live our day to day lives. It's thinking about how we respond to our young people. It's thinking about every single time we get upset, how can I respond in a way that lets them know that I understand where they're coming from because I've walked your shoes before. And I also want to give you agency and voice so that you can use your voice to make things right, to heal, to make things better, to be supported, whatever that needs and whatever it looks like. But it's not a program. And it's also not a set of prompts, right? It's not something that you can be like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Although we just watched a video of things that can be done and in a way that makes sense, it doesn't mean that it's the tell all be all, right? You may do things differently, right? You may have conversations with your kids in a different way, right? But as long as it's coming from a place of love, compassion, and empathy, your young people will be fine. Restorative justice is not meant to be a punishment. It is in no way to reframe or rename damaging programs. More often than not, I hear people go, oh, yeah, we're restorative now. We're restorative now, right? But what does that really mean, right? Because again, going back to what I said about working in a system where there are other measures already in place, let's not put the name restorative on top of something that we know is not restorative, right? And we all know what that looks like, right? Things being called one thing, but it's really something else. And it's like, I'm a little confused. I don't really know what's going on, right? It's not a way to rename something that has been doing terrible things to our young people. It's a way to say, let's stop, look at the things that haven't been working, right? Look at the statistics that show that Black and brown kids are being disproportionately suspended and try to fix that so that we can create holistic young people. It's not something you can finish, right? Again, not a program. Restorative conversations are forever, right? Thinking back to that 12-year-old, you may be 12 and you may have learned to live your way for 12 years. I can't just stop because I think that you got it, right? It is ongoing, which is why it's super important for if teachers are implementing things that hopefully we're also suggesting to families to implement as well at home so that young people can see that this is a holistic approach, right? It's 360 all around. We're all here to love you. We're all here to support you. We're all here to guide you. We're all here to meet you with empathy. We're all here to meet you with support. It's not a means of empowering already privileged families and students, right? And what this means is, although restorative practices should be used for all of our students, no matter their race, or ethnic background, it's important to note that restorative practices come from indigenous roots, right? And it's really looking at our young people who have been disproportionately suspended to say, how can we help fix a situation that is targeting young people who are Black and Brown specifically, right? And although restorative practices will help with communication across all young people, it's very important that we're really, really thinking about how we're supporting all of our young people, right? So that all of our young people end up with the same opportunities. It's not inherently anti-racist, right? We know that there are things that are happening, right? There's a ton of research out there. You have to be very, very mindful when you're reading up on things, right? We don't want it to go against the core of what we believe and what we know, right? So just be mindful when you're doing your research. If you are out there looking for ways to implement restorative practices or things that you could say, right? Just being mindful of the indigenous practices that are. And last but not least, it is not meant to fit comfortably into our current education systems, right? I said earlier, it is going to be uncomfortable, right? If you are that teacher that is like, I am committed to changing my language and changing the way that I see my young people, the way I talk to my young people, then you're going to expect some pushback. But with the right team and the right support of teachers, staff, deans, you can build systems that help support young people in the most amazing ways. Again, there's a ton of schools out there that's doing it. Do the research. It's really dope to see great things happening. And in part two of the restorative practices video that I will be recording, we're going to be talking about restorative circles and how we can implement those into the classroom. So if you are interested in going another step, that would be for you. So something that I said earlier is taking a moment to speak from the I. So I want you to think about a time when you were really happy with your students, maybe something that they may have done for you. And I want you to fill in the blanks. So I'm going to say, I feel really happy when I am recording content because it makes me excited to know that people like to learn. Um, and I'd like to do this all the time. So now you think about your young people and something that they've done for you that makes you really happy. I statements, we know, are a form of assertive language, right? They can be very effective when helping young people articulate their feelings before or after an incident. Just thinking back to those CBT skills, right? That cognitive behavioral therapy from earlier, right? It's really about helping students connect their thoughts to their feelings and their feelings to their behaviors. Um, so you can feel free to use this with your young people, especially your elementary school kids, because they can understand how they can put things in little bubbles to make it make sense for them. So now that we've done all this groundwork and we have been talking about I statements and all these things, we're going to go into some scenarios because I know y'all have rocked out with me and we have had so much fun. So now let's test your little bit of knowledge on your restorative skills. I want you to think about how you would approach this conversation in a way that doesn't diminish the relationship or respect you have for one another. So in this scenario, a group of teachers share a classroom. Some are getting frustrated by the way others are leaving it. You can take a moment to pause the video and write down what your response might be. And when you are ready to hit play, I'm going to see if you are in alignment with me. So if you wrote down your response and you're hitting play now, then the hope is that you may have said something like this: have a group meeting with all the teachers that share the space, allow for equity of voice, by saying that you are not driving the conversation and that you just want to bring everyone together to make sure we're all in alignment. You might want to say something like, um, I think it would be awesome if we make the classroom look good for our students. Definitely ask if anyone has any ideas of some things that y'all could do, followed by taking ownership of the part that we all will play in keeping the room clean. Um, and then opening the floor for others to take part on things that they could do or they would like to do. This response will help everyone take ownership of the space, and have no one feel like they're the bad guy, right? Because you don't want to have a weird school year, right? All because at the beginning of the school year you called someone out, right? Um, but it does help to create a space that is shared ownership, right? And that's what we want. While it's also important to note that there's no cookie cutter approach, um, we can't control if someone gets upset or gets mad, right? We can only come from a place of empathy and empowerment, just like we would with our kids, but with an adult. So kudos to y'all, because I know y'all got that one right. Let's go on to the next one. All right. So Alana and Jamie are classmates. They sit next to each other. One day, Alana slams her chair into Jamie's desk, causing Jamie to get upset and push Alana back. Before it could escalate any further, you intervene by doing what? So, again, take a moment to think about your next steps, pause the video and jot them down. And when you're ready, hit play for the response. In a restorative way, your next steps would be to check in with the students individually to find out what happened from each one's perspective. Then have a conversation with both students that helps them to take accountability for their actions. This is known as a mediation. A mediation is important because not only does it allow both parties to articulate their expectations, it empowers them to use their voice and to come to a solution that everyone can understand. One important note is that a mediation should allow for equity of voice and planning next steps. So both young people sit down, they have a conversation, right? You find out from both young persons' perspective what's going on, right? And then you guys have an agreement, right? And this could be a written agreement, it could be a verbal agreement, but agreement between the three of you that y'all will not slam each other's chair, y'all will not hit each other, y'all are walking out of there with an understanding that everything is cool and that like it was a disagreement and things happen. Did you get that one right? I hope so. Okay. But after the mediation with Alana and Jamie, you overhear that other students are going to fight from other students that they're going to fight after school. You hear that there has been an ongoing rivalry between the students for a few weeks and that other students are now involved. So you had the mediation, and both students agreed that they resolved the issue only to find out more information after. It's happened to all of us. So take a moment, pause the video, and think about what your next steps might be. Remember, we want to highlight um, and meet the students where they are. We also want to teach them that fighting is not okay. So go ahead and pause and think about what you might do. And when you're ready, hit play. So in the restorative process, after a mediation session between the teacher and student or students, um, it may call for more parties to be involved, right? So at this point, we know they're about to fight. You may have to call the dean or the principal, right? Whoever the next person is in line, right? Coach or staff, right? This would be considered a restorative conference, right? So now it's no longer a mediation. Mediation is small, conference is bigger, okay? Um, this could involve parents or caregivers, right? But it's really about all the supports of the young people, right? A young person may say, can I bring a friend? right? If there's equity on both ends and both kids are bringing a friend, great, right? Definitely caregivers, definitely possibly the dean, right? Anyone who's kind of going to be help them understand that like fighting is not okay without being again punitive, right? But also helping them understand that like we still have zero tolerance for fighting, right? And if we having a mediation, right? A mediation is saying that you agree that you are not going to do a thing. It's also important to note that restorative practices and restorative conversations in this way, mediations or conferences, are voluntary. So young people should understand that if you are not going to go in the way that is restorative, that you are going to have to be in alignment with what the bigger school picture is, right? And that may be suspension, right? That may be expulsion, right? This is saying, I'm trying to help you be better before it gets to something that it doesn't have to be, and really helping young people understand that, right? So you want to make sure you alert the other adults who want to be part of the conversation about what's going on, what you heard. Um, then you want to pull the students aside if necessary, right? Again, alert those parents. As a group, you will all plan to have a team sit down together to mediate the situation and find a solution that makes sense for everyone, right? Again, this may you may want it to be in writing, a contract, right? Because this now we've had the mediation, you understand what's going on. This is the last step before what we know to be true is going to happen and it moves out of the restorative realm and into the punitive realm, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. So I know this one was a little tricky. I just wanted to see if y'all was going to figure it out. But if you were thinking even close to in this way, then you're on the right track. Great job, y'all. We are almost at the end. So this last nugget is a self-assessment. We did not create this. I will drop, if I haven't already, drop the links below so that you can have access to all of these gems. But you can do this on your own time. These are really just questions that helps elicit who you are and how restorative you are. They ask questions like, do you listen? How would the young people describe you? And this can be done as a group or individually. So you can feel free to use this however you would like and whenever you would like. Again, I will drop the links to this and everything below so that you can have them as well. So now our key takeaways. Introduce restorative skills into your daily life. Skills like problem solving, empathy, positivity, and communication are all critical for restorative practices to be effective. And while these things are all introduced through other aspects of your teaching, make an effort to discuss and model these through your day-to-day interactions, okay? So that's every day, all day, in your regular life. Um, Use conflict as a learning opportunity. When conflict arises, and it will arise in your classroom, whether it is between two students or between the student and the teacher, use it as an opportunity to engage in restorative conversations. Start a dialogue to identify the origin of the problem and identify the feelings associated with the conflict. Don't forget the feelings. It's super important to validate how people feel. We love it, and so do our young people. Introduce Invite students to share things about themselves, right? It is important to get to know the whole student. Restorative practices take the whole student into account, right? By getting to know your students, right, you're building a healthy relationship and also you're helping to learn what their behaviors are so that you can understand why they are the way they are. And they can also understand why you are the way you are too. Recognize and praise success. Again, restorative language is not just about when the bad things happen, it's also about when the good things happen, right? Acknowledge your students when they engage in respectful dialogue and effective communication, especially for those little teeny ones, right? Because they're learning, they're growing, and they're just trying to figure it out. And last but not least, engage and encourage relationship building, right? Foster strong relationships among your kids. Teach them how to be friendly. Teach them how to love. There's nothing wrong with kindness. I love kindness. I'm sure you love kindness. And kids will thank you for it in the end. So this is one small nugget and keepsake. Again, I will drop the link below, but this is for you. Remember that these are the building blocks of restorative practices, right? Respect, empathy, responsibility, right? All of the beautiful things. So feel free to take a screenshot of this. Feel free to keep it in your back pocket. When things get hard, whip it out. And just remember that you are doing an amazing job being a teacher. It is not easy being a teacher in New York City or anywhere. You guys, y'all rock. Y'all are dope. So thank you so much for tuning into this webinar. I hope you found it helpful. If you're interested in learning more about restorative circles and how to implement them into your classroom, there will be a part 2 to this video. So please feel free to watch it. Um, this is my contact information. If you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, or if you're looking for people to come out and do healthy relationships at your school, please feel free to shoot me an email, and let's make magic happen. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye.